Hello Manish, welcome to Maths, Magic and Mindsets. So, as you know, some people fear math, some people love math. Here, we explore how mathematical thinking shapes the way we learn, lead, and live. So, everybody sees the applicability of math in real life scenarios. So, Manish, you've done it all. From diving deep into data to steering global teams with strategy and purpose at Microsoft. I'm so excited to unpack the logic and curiosity behind your journey. So, could you tell us a little about that journey, how it all began, and what shaped your path as a leader?
Thanks, Divyansh. First of all, thanks for having me. And this is a very interesting topic. Like you said, math is something that people either love, fear, or either love or fear. And looking forward to our conversation. And I hope by the end of it, people see why it's more lovable than something to be afraid of.
Yeah.
So by education, I'm an engineer. And then after my engineering, I actually went on to do industrial and management engineering, which was, a combination of industrial engineering and management. And then like most engineers do, I actually joined a software company.
Wow.
Right. So I started off as a application developer, but very quickly, literally in about 2 years of me starting my professional career, something very interesting happened. And actually, I would say today, in hindsight, it is interesting. To me, it happened by chance, and that was me moving from general purpose application software into the field of data warehousing. Now, I'm talking of 1998. That, and I can imagine that sounds like
Very
Jurassic. But the thing is that while today data analytics, insights, patterns, all of this seems like daily vocabulary. Everybody uses these terms very freely. But back then, data warehousing was an esoteric subject. It was something that scientists would use, right?
Yeah.
But then, like I said, it just so happened I was probably at the right place at the right time, and I moved into the field of data warehousing, and that took me into a amazing journey of learning how to look at data, how to see the story that the data tells, how to connect dots, and so on. So that's where my journey began. Then I moved on from being a tech to a salesperson. Did the rounds like any seller does. Moved to doing sales management, and then I moved to leadership roles where I was responsible for driving sales strategy, business planning, and operations for large businesses. That's how my journey has been.
Wow, Manish, that's amazing. Thinking of math as a mindset that enables your leadership journey. So, you've spent over 2 decades at Microsoft driving business strategy and transformations. Where do you see mathematical thinking in leadership and decision making?
See, it's interesting that you asked that. Much to or contrary to what people might think, at leadership levels, you are required to make decisions. But interesting thing is that you would often not have all the information that you might want to make those decisions, which basically means that you are working with incomplete information, and yet you have to make a decision. And then obviously, depending on what decision it is, the impact could be very significant, right? So how do you do that? So the this is where the numeracy or the math comes in, right? So what essentially it entails is to look at the past performance, past numbers, history, but then you have to apply that lens on it. There'll be outliers, there'll be context to the historical performance, right? So you've got to normalize that. Then you have to make assumptions, because remember, we are saying that you don't have all the data, right? So you have to interpolate data, you have to make assumptions. How do you make assumptions? So you have to basically factor in risks, factor in other internal and external factors, and then you have to arrive at a decision. And not just that, because every single decision is based on assumptions and certain risks that you're undertaking, it's also very important that you also build a plan to mitigate those risks. That again is where the mathematics comes in.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. So, could you elaborate more on how do mathematical concepts play into business planning and sales excellence at Microsoft?
See, it's quite shall we say intuitive for some and not for others. Let me break down business planning and sales excellence first
Yeah.
of all. This entails functions like budgeting, forecasting, overall revenue planning, resource planning, and then when you run all of this, there's a constant cycle of monitoring, optimizing, and course correcting.
Yeah.
Right now, let's break down each of these into what does it entail. So think of budgeting, forecasting, and growth planning as an example. This is an out and out modeling exercise.
Yeah.
Right, like I just said, you will typically have past performance, but that's just not good enough to predict future. Right.
Yeah.
And if you think of the AI models also, while they get trained on historical data, but then that's where the intelligence bit comes into it, right? So it's not just about seeing a pattern, but also anticipating and predicting what the future might look like, right? Something very similar when you're doing budgeting and forecasting. Like I said, you got to model it, then you have to basically also factor in other factors, right? Or other things that are happening around us, right? Think of optimization and resource allocation as another example. And this could apply to headcounts, could apply to investments, it could apply to sales and incentives as an example. Now, all of this again, think about it, is a balancing act between what you put in and what you get out. It's an ROI. So, to just give you one simple example, if a decision is to be taken, do I put 20 salespeople or do I put 10 salespeople? Right? There's never the right answer. The question is, what will I get if I put additional 10 salespeople? What will it cost me? And what incremental revenue will I get? What's the ROI on that? Is the money best utilized there? Or can I put the same money in marketing? Now, in what I said, if you think about it, all of it has to be driven by numbers, calculations,
Yeah.
what percentage, what dollars, what revenue, and that's where, in all of this, the numbers come in. So, as you might notice, there is a common underlying theme in all of what I was saying. It is basically iterative process, right? So you hypothesize, then you plan, execute, learn, and then that cycle repeats, which is very, very similar to how mathematical modeling cycles work.
Yeah.
Right? So that is how the two get connected.
That's such a powerful connection between numbers and narratives. I'm curious, how does this play out across different cultures that you've worked in?
Interesting, and it's so apt because, as you would have heard, increasingly it is becoming a global village. So you know you could be conceptualizing something in one part of the world, it may get planned elsewhere, and then it may get executed in another place. And I've had the fortune of working with people and across geographies. And see, really, if you think about it, it's just that the pivot changes. So if I was to compare, let's say, how East and more specifically Asia works versus, let's say, the Western world, in the West, the primary pivot is on data, numbers, hard facts. Whereas if you think about Asia, all of us tend to pivot first on relationships,
Yeah.
context. But remember, it's not that we are talking in air. We are also talking in context of numbers. And it's interesting, if you think about it, the language may change when you move from Japan to India to Middle East to the US, for example. But if you reflect on it, how do the numbers get written? Everybody writes numbers the same way, right? Everybody can understand numbers. So let me give you an interesting anecdote. Have you ever been to China?
Yes, I have.
Interesting. And then I'm assuming you would have shopped on the streets. Have you?
No, actually, I haven't shopped on the street.
Okay,
So.
then you missed a great learning. So let me share with you. A couple of years back, I'd gone to Shenzhen,
Yeah.
and like everybody thinks that everything is cheap in China, so we went out shopping. So we went to this huge mall where in one building you could get anything which was remotely connected to electronics and computers. And obviously, I don't speak Mandarin, and the guys there don't speak English as much. So guess how we negotiated?
How?
The negotiation was happening on a calculator.
Wow.
So I would, pick something and I would do this, right?
Yeah.
And the guy would pull out his calculator, punch a number, and show me the number. Now I would take his calculator, punch in the number that I'm willing to pay, give it to him. So that's what numbers, and that's how it pans out in a global context. That's one common language everybody understands.
Wow, that's so insightful. I never heard of this universality of math. So, what mindset has helped you stay adaptive and effective across 2.5 decades of technological change?
See, my professional journey has been pretty much at Microsoft. So, who I am today is kind of shaped with how Microsoft's philosophy and culture is. And one of the pivots that happened in Microsoft when Satya came in and he took over as the CEO was this notion of growth mindset. And what it really means is that you are a learn it all, not a know it all, which basically means that you're always learning. You're always, unlearning what you already know and learning new stuff. Right now, this may seem very simple when it is said, but it actually has a very deep meaning. What it means is that just because somebody is deemed as an expert on something because somebody has done something for 20 years doesn't necessarily mean that this person has nothing to learn, right?
Yeah.
So that's the fundamental principle. The other two things that have actually helped me as I moved along my professional journey was progress over perfection, right? What is important is to keep moving forward. And like we discussed, it is inevitable that there'll be iteration. So don't wait for the perfect moment, don't wait for the perfect model, just keep progressing.
Yeah.
And eventually perfection may happen, right? And then the underlying principle in all of this is always remain foolish, or say, or one could say, always remain curious. The day curiosity is killed, that's when your learning stops, which means your growth stops.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It is very important to keep growing. So, if you could swap with jobs with anyone at Microsoft for one day, who would it be and what would you hope to learn?
Did you say job or did you say the compensation package? What did you exactly mean?
Just the job.
Okay, let me think. That's a very tempting array of roles. You know, Perhaps a lot of people will say Satya, but I actually think maybe I would actually want to take Amy Hood's job. She's the CFO of Microsoft,
Oh,
and it's kind of timely that we are discussing this because the results just got declared last night. And the reason I say Amy Hood and not Satya is because if you think about what's happening at Microsoft and in real terms across all big tech is that we are at this cusp where AI is exploding and all big tech, of course, including Microsoft, is investing very, very heavily, disproportionately. Tens of billions of dollars are being invested in AI infrastructure creation.
yeah.
Now, as a CFO, it's a very tough balancing act because you got to fund your priorities for today and you have to carve out capex dollars for investing in future. How do you balance the two? How do you keep your investors happy? How do you keep your customers happy? How do you keep your employees engaged? That is a masterclass and a amazing opportunity to learn and grow in this whole thing about how do you do resource management. In this case, it's about money management. That's why I would take Amy's job if I could for a day.
Yeah, that sounds really nice. What's one mathematical concept that you think applies beautifully to leadership in general?
Let me think. Since you're talking of math, compounding, I would say, and and really to kind of verbalize it, what really compounding means is every small bit, when it keeps happening, it builds on top of each other, and then the end result becomes really big.
Yeah.
Let me give you a very simple mathematical example of illustrating what I'm saying. If I was to tell you, Divyansh, I want you to, make a improvement up to 50% of where you are today in a year's time. Does it feel easy? Does it feel difficult?
To me, it sounds very challenging.
Okay, now let me make it easy for you. If I was to tell you, Divyansh, all you have to do is improve by 0.1% every day for a year. You think that's doable?
That sounds very doable.
Guess what? 0.1% compounded for 365 days is 44%.
Oh.
Now,
Wow.
think about, when I asked you, you have to improve by 50% in a year, it sounded like a huge daunting task. And the moment I said 0.1% on a daily basis, it seems simple. And that really is the compounding. Now, right now you're talking of a year. Now take this to 10 years.
Yeah.
It will become a staggering, mind boggling number. So I think that is something that most people tend to underestimate.
Wow, even though everybody studies compounding in school, I've never really realized the power of compounding. Well, Manish, this has been a really insightful discussion. You've shown us that mathematical thinking isn't just about numbers, it's about curiosity, rhythm, and structure. And especially clarity in action. So thank you for having us.
Thanks, Divyansh. It was a pleasure talking to you today.